think we're back in live. Just give me a moment. Let me get my screen up so I can show you how far we've come with the puzzle and do the rest of the work in. So, where we left this yesterday, or last, was we had what we believed was a completed grid fill. We had also spotted that the thematic thing that seems to be going on with these 16 answers, whose clues all give a word which is slightly too long for its entry, is that we're losing the letters of Christian, hopeful. And then I think Shark also spotted that Christian, hopeful, and hopeful are the names of two characters in The Pilgrim's Progress, which is, I think, a religious novel from the 1600s by John Bunyan. Just looking at the grid here, one thing I did fail to do was I think I forgot to drop the I from 23 across. But anyway, we have a D there now, so that's good. Shark has made a few breakthroughs on this. We haven't quite worked out all of the passing of all the clues, but I'm satisfied that they all are correct, except for something that Shark sent me a message about last night. The answer to this clue is not septate, which we had previously thought it might be. It is, in fact, replace. That is given by repla, which is a word meaning with divisions. I'll just pull that up. Partition formed by the ingrowth of placentas. Anglicanism, which is Church of England, or COE. And of course the answer is the definition is given as put back. So even though we did have a correct letter there in the second position, and it didn't help us get Esparto, it is of course incorrect. Now, that's all pretty good progress so far. Still haven't worked out what the clue in for prohibition is going to be, but that is clearly the answer to that clue. So I think I'm just going to properly enter all those cells in the grid. I'm using the green ones for just to keep track of cells where we have lost the letters of Christian and hopeful. But the I'm going to make other entry is just blue. I think that's, oh no, I need to one more down here. Now that leaves us with our 4 entries which need to be put through a playfair cipher before we are able to properly enter them into the grid. And the clue answers were PK, pied, beer and Sophie. Just as I'm writing those, I'm going to break them up into pairs for a particular reason, but PK becomes, in the grid that we have so far, RS something C. Pied becomes, in the grid that we have so far, RB something, so S something. Beer becomes CA something E. Sophie becomes A something KR. But what we... I won't go through how Playfair... Actually, no, I will. A description of how Playfair ciphers work is given in the preamble. So if we just pull that up and... it's just right up here. In a Playfair code square, the keyword with no repeated letter is followed by the remainder of the alphabet. I stands in for I and J, as in the example shown above. And the example shown above is this little grid that we have next to the cell here, which has disco in its first letters. I think there's a bit of a delay at the moment. Sorry about that. I think my screen share might not be working as well as it could be. Wait a sec, let me reconnect it. Try and get that working again. There you have it. So this is the Playfair square that's given with the grid, and you see the keyword is discovery. So we see discovery written out across the first row, and then for most of the second row, and then the leftover letters of the alphabet, except J, are all given in order. So, for example, to encode the word answer, which is the example given, you find the A and you find the N, and that will be encoded as what then happens is you take the corresponding position. So A becomes R and N becomes Q, which is the to sort of make a rectangle or a square. That's one of the examples given. The other interesting thing that happens is if letters are in the same row or column, what we do is we just go to the left of it. So if you're trying to include DS, for example, you take I and C. And the same for if letters are in the same column going down. If you're trying to encode DO, using an example, you take I for D, but then you go back and you take, just go back to the first row of the column, you take O. So DO would become ID. So that's how the Playfair cipher works, and I think knowing that, we'll be able to sort of make some observations here. And I think what I was having a look at some of these things in the last stream, but Shark actually managed to solve this completely by hand and extract the keyword. But just by looking at some of these pairs that we have, so PE goes to RS. So what we know from that is that P is going to be PE and RS are going to form a square in the final Playfair square, with P probably being on the same row as R and E probably being on the same row as S. That is, as long as they're not all in the same line. But that's where we come down to this pair here, PI and RP. Now, curiously, we have here P gives R and I gives P. Now, what that suggests is if those, we're only looking for a 7-letter keyword, remember, I don't think I've said that yet. So solvers need to identify two words with 7 and 8 letters. One is the keyword for the play fair code. So assuming that's the 7-letter one. But what this little letter formation here means, PI becoming RP, we don't have 4 separate letters, we've only got 3 separate letters. And that last example I gave here of what happened when we tried to encode DO using the keyword discovery, we ended up with ID. It's exactly what we have going on here. So P, let's assume we have letters in the same row. P, we're just shifting across one to encode. So P must become R, and I, if that becomes P, then that means that I must be at the end of the road. The end of the row. I'm just going to do up a little play fair square there. So that really sort of gets us started. So, and it suggests that we're looking for a, if we're looking for a 7-letter word, then, and as long as there's no duplicated letters, then it's going to fit in 5 letters across the first row and then 2 letters are underneath. So let's just have a look at how we can fill out a little bit more of this. You have ED becoming S something. Once again, I'll assume E is in the same row as the S. Now, ordinarily, E would not be in the same row as the S, because if E was not in the keyword, for example, and the keyword ends here, you'd have E either here or here. But then as you listen out the rest of the alphabet, S would be further down. If one of them was in the keyword and another one was not in the keyword, then they still would not be in the same row, because by the time you get to S, you're going to be nowhere near up the top here where the letters in the keyword are. Now, what that tells me is that S and E, even though we don't know what ED translates into, we do know what ES translates into. And once again, this is assuming that they're not in the same column. It tells me that those are 2 letters that are going to be potentially in the same row. And if that's the case, then they need to be next to each other. When we could have Pressy, P-R-E, something here. So if that was the case, we would have the E there and the S there. And that could give a word like prescient, actually. No, give a word like preside, maybe. Without, it wouldn't have the E, but we looked into that. No, that is not in fact the answer. It also would give nice little word form if we just put the SE here. PR something ISE, which is a fairly good supposition because it's consistent with the English language, I suppose, or common word forms. What was the next step along the line? This one here. So similarly here, BE and CA. Now we have there assuming we don't use A, B or C here, and we're dealing with a 7-letter code word, that would mean A, B and C must be here. It follows straight after the code word. So for BE to translate into CA, and that's consistent with BE translating into CA, B and E, you shift them along one and you get CA. So it tends to confirm that we are dealing with E here in the bottom line. What next? We had SO, and we know that that gives A something. We know that S and A are going to be in the same line, but because we don't know what the O actually is going to give yet, but it's going to, we know A is not in the, we know that must mean that the O is either here or here. Because remember when we do our playfair code, or in fact it could be here or here, what we are looking for is letters that form a square, and we encode using opposite parts of the square. We do like it being here because we have something else that starts to look like a word. And you can probably guess what that word is. Let's just get rid of that O, and we'll see what else we can deduce from some of these other pairs. We have ED, cluing to give S something. Now, if D is here, or here, within the clue word, we would not get S from ED. But we would get S if D was here, not in the clue word, naturally following after A, B, C and D. So we've used that part there. We have K and E. Now, naturally, K would go E, F, G, H. We have I here, I, J, stands for J. Naturally, K could go here. So if we're trying to clue KE, that would give us something C. So we do like K going there. What that means as well is that we can deduce it. We don't have the E to deal with. We have F, G, H, I, J already in there. So we know that none of those letters are in fact going to be in the code word. We have FI. So FI here, that will include a KR. So that's consistent with what we've just put in there. That's very, very helpful. Now we have ER here. These line up next to each other. So that will include to FE. In fact, I think we probably have enough there to complete the clue. So KE will give us FC, so we can complete these ones. ED will give us SF, and SO will give us A something. Now, let's have a look. KL, M, N, O. So O could be in this position here if we have M, N, O. But O could also be up here. And this is where, if we go back to, let me just pull up, if we go back to the Wikipedia page for, I mean, what we have there is a keyword that looks a lot like promise, and if it hadn't occurred to you already, as you're watching that, not to worry, it certainly would have occurred to some. Let me just try and pull up the Wikipedia page for Pilgrim's Progress. So, if we look at Pilgrim's Progress, and this is where we can jump ahead a bit. We can actually, I mean, our two characters were Christian and hopeful. And there is a passage in the summary of the plot here. It says, Christian and hopeful come to a hill called Lucre, where there is a silver mine. And I do like this because I think in the clue answers we did have a reference, so in the clues or the puzzles, we did in fact have a reference to Lucre. So already that's made me think, this is not just this story, but this paragraph is surely thematically related. A man called Damas urges them to join the mining going on, but Christian sees through Damas's trickery and they avoid a mine. Afterward, a false pilgrim named By Ends and his friends, who follow Christian and Hopeful, only to take advantage of them, perish at the hill Lucre. never to be seen or heard from again. On a rough stony stretch of road, Christian and Hopeful leave the highway to travel on the easier bypath meadow, where a rainstorm forces them to spend the night. In the morning, they are captured by Giant Despair, who is known for his savage cruelty, and his wife Diffidence. The pilgrims are taken to Giant's Doubting Castle, where they are imprisoned, beaten and starved. So I think we already have something there which could be thematically relevant to this idea that Christian and Hopeful disappeared. And because of course the letters from Christian and Hopeful disappeared. Hi Liari, how are you? So we like that. The giant and the giantess want them to commit suicide, but they endure the ordeal until Christian realises a key he has called Promise, here's that keyword, Promise, will open all the gates of Doubting Castle. Using the key and the giant's vulnerability to sunlight, they escape. So let's come back here to our Playfair Square. We're looking for the 7-letter key, and of course the key is going to be Promise. So by doing that, we have managed to also work out what these additional letters are going to be. Sorry, what the ciphered versions of these 4 entries are going to be. So I can put those in. SA, what does SA become? SA becomes AP. Beautiful. Make sure that's a bit better there, and I think I can probably try and get rid of the highlighted parts as well. APKR, RPSF goes here. I mean, obviously in constructing this puzzle, and this is common when Playfair clues are Playfair encoding is used. Setter needs to be careful to choose entries and fodder. Just like what we've seen there, is we were able to work out that, crack that Playfair cipher by ourselves and derive the key. Setters need to be careful to choose words which I think give just enough info to properly decode the grid. So we know that the first word we're looking for is promise. And just with that Playfair cipher that we have there, Koeql Hasbro. Just going to complete the rest of the cipher. L, we've used NOPQRSTU VWXYZ. Oh, which one? No, the S we don't use, we've already used. Okay, so we see that the title of the puzzle itself starts to look like it could well be enciphered. So let's have a look at that too, see if we can unravel that. So the first thing we do is we put it into pairs of 2. So KO would become GI. EQ would become so this is going to be N, not M, because we've used the M in promise. Would become AN. LH become TD. AE would become ES. We're deciphering this, not enciphering this, so we're working backwards. OS would become PA, and PO would become IR. So the title itself, and let me put that back into its original enumeration, 5 and then 7, gives Giant Despair, which is also something that we saw here. They are captured by Giant Despair, who's known for his savage cruelty. Now, remember, we are looking for another 8-letter word. Because we need to highlight some things. So preamble told us, see you later. Let me just go back to the preamble. The preamble told us that the keyword promise is used to encode answers in 4 asterisk clues. The other, which is 8 letters, describes the location of the puzzle's title. So the location of the puzzle's top, and determines which cells of the completed grid must be highlighted. Now the puzzle's title is Giant Despair. He is from Doubting Castle. See that, and we realise that, well, Doubting is 8 letters. Doubting Castle here. Let's come back to the preamble. That determines which cells of the completed grid need to be highlighted. And this is where if we look closely at this grid, we realise that there is something very strange going on with the entries, in that there are portions of the grid which use particular letters and not other letters. So there's a portion of the grid that uses particular letters and not other letters, and a second portion of the grid that uses other letters and not particular letters. And those letters are all the letters in the word doubting. So for example, have a look down this central row. All of these letters here appear in the word doubting. If we look at the rows on either side of it, all of these letters here appear in doubting. Same things going on there on the other side. If we look in this row, all the letters here appear in doubting. So I wonder if I can colour this in slightly better. Might be better. There we go. We've also got these ones, and that one, and this, and that. What else do we have? These letters, and these letters. So it's all symmetrical. I think as long as we've properly entered all our other entries, and I think we do, and it just acts to confirm that we're otherwise correct, even though we haven't fully passed everything else. But what we have made there is a castle. I think that's got to be the end of the puzzle there, because I think we've used everything in the... we've identified everything that we were told to do in the preamble, and of course what we end up with is Doubting Castle, which is the castle of Giant Despair. It's where Christian and Hopeful were taken. And of course they disappeared when they were taken there. And so thematically they have disappeared from the grid. And of course the idea of promise being the key. Promise is of course the key which Christian realised he had and used to escape the castle. And we don't see that. I don't think we see Giant Despair being vulnerable to sunlight. Although there might be something else in there which I haven't noticed. But it's a beautifully elegant puzzle. The clue was very, very tricky, but we still haven't quite looked at the passing of all of the clues, but once we got through it, I think very fair, though clues which required quite a bit of pushing until they gave away their secrets, before they gave away their secrets. When you have a beautiful little representation like that at the end, and the use of a cipher which is thematically almost required by this idea that there's a key used in this particular part of the story, and it all comes together in that. The end game comes together in a nice little gentle way with a bit of a little penny drop moment when we realise what's going on. It makes for a very enjoyable puzzle to solve, and no doubt that is why this puzzle won the Ascot Gold Cup for the year 2004. Thank you again to Shark, who contributed and achieved, I think, the majority of this solve. Very enjoyable solve, and I am really enjoying solving these puzzles on the live stream. So there we go, the Ascot Gold Cup winner for 2004, Koeql Haeospo, which is really giant to spare by Elgin. An excellent puzzle, and we'll leave the stream there. See you later.